Hello and welcome. You found the Social Work Podcast. My name's Jonathan Singer, and I'll be your host as we explore all things social work. In today's Social Work Podcast, we're looking at the beginning, middle, and end of social work. Now, this is not an apocalyptic tale of burning towers of progress notes and zombie utilization managers. Although, that does sound kind of interesting. No, today's episode is much more innocent than that. Ask any social worker, first-year undergrad, or retired emeritus professor, what are the most basic phases of social work? They'll tell you. The beginning, the middle, and the end. We're going to be exploring those three phases today by hearing excerpts from a collection of poems and short stories, appropriately called Beginnings, Middles, and Ends, sideways stories on the art and soul of social work, written by Ogden Rogers, professor and chair of the Department of Social Work at the University of Wisconsin-River Falls. This collection was published in 2013 by White Hat Communications, and Ogden's written a beautiful little collection of stories from his 30 years of social work experience. And of the 99 stories in his collection, we'll hear 6, 2 each from beginnings, middles, and ends. Beginnings. These first 2 stories are about beginnings. The first is a story called Content, Process, and Boundary. And it's a reflection on the importance of beginnings and the challenges of getting them right, especially when working in a fast-paced, high-volume setting like a hospital. The second is excerpts from a story called The Welcome Lecture. Ogden welcomes a group of social work students to the profession and shares some tips he's learned along the way.
I pulled aside the curtain. The patient was lying on the gurney, bandaged in several places, and on an IV. "Hi, how can I help you?" "I'm not sure how. I don't know that I need help from you." Okay, let me start again. What brings you here today?" She laughed. An ambulance?" I stepped back and bowed my head. "No, you're absolutely right. I'm in a hurry, and I've started this all wrong. Please allow me to begin again." I knocked on the door. "Hello, Mrs. Hamlin? I'm Mr. Rogers. I'm a social worker here in the emergency department. Dr. McAllister told me that he's spoken with you about being admitted to the surgical unit, and he told me you have some concerns about your children at home. I'm wondering if we could talk together. Is there anything I can do to assist you?" She smiled back. "Hello, Mr. Rogers. I'm Arella Hamlin. I'm also a social worker at the City Department of Social Services. I'm glad you're here. I've apparently been in a serious automobile accident, and they're going to admit me to the hospital. I might have to go to the operating room tonight. I was on my way home from work. My children are probably at home now from school. I haven't been able to contact them. I need to call my neighbor to see if she can watch them until I can get a hold of my mother and father, who might be able to look after them. I don't have my phone, and I'm afraid I don't know her number." "Mrs. Hamlin, it would be my pleasure to help. Let me slip over to my office and get my directory and a phone. I'll be right back." She laughed. "It's a pleasure doing business with you." Beginnings. They're so important.
Tired of this one-way heartbeats. They come just leave me with nothing.
Welcome. I understand that you're interested in joining our club called Social Work. If you could spare a moment, I'd like to share some thoughts with you. You see, there are some risks and benefits in becoming a social worker, and I think you should consider them carefully before moving on. Social workers are change agents, and some people hate change. They see it as a threat to all they've accumulated, like money and power. Some of these people are so attached to money and power, they'll do anything to keep anyone from taking any of it. Depending on where you practice your social work, you might make them feel threatened, and they can lash out at you. The world, it seems to me, falls into two groups of people, those who think in black and white and those who can appreciate the gray. One has to appreciate the way that a beach is there, but in some ways not there, in motion, with each wave that breaks upon it. Families, crimes, heroes, villains, even life and death. Depending on how closely you look at them, you'll find that there are aspects of fuzziness about their edges. Things are rarely black and white, so one has to be inquisitive, open, and courageous about entering into a world where humans get messy. A woman walks into your office and says she has a problem. She says she thinks her husband likes to fuck their cow. Now, to do this right, you have to be able to explore this, and non-judgmentally. How long has she suspected this man has had a problem having sex with the cow? Does she suspect he has sex with other farm animals? What behaviors in either the cow or the husband have given rise to this suspicion? Does the cow have a name? What is it that now she's telling you about this problem with having sex with the cow? What does she think about this practice? And here's the clincher. To really be able to help this woman, you're going to have to go someplace in your mind that can have some appreciation of this cow sex going on in the family. You'll find out later that this whole story was just a test. She wanted to see how judgmental you are about the husband, because she wants to tell you about this real problem she has about having sex with her husband and a loaded gun. We know the minute you create a box, there is an inside and an outside of the box. The social worker will be very happy to explore the inside, but will by nature also explore the outside. What is out there? Another box, yes. And another, and another, and another. When you start to think like a social worker, it will sometimes separate you from the way that a lot of other people think. I want you to be prepared for this. It can get lonely, and frankly, heavy. You will never see the world the same way once you start to appreciate the gray. This thinking may isolate you from others sometimes. Not everybody appreciates empathy. Years ago, when Americans were shocked when terrorists used airplanes as bombs in 2001, the first thing I thought was, wow, how angry do you have to be to fly a plane into a building? Lots of people around me at the time were not interested in the thoughts or the feelings of people that they wanted to see as, quote, the enemy. Now you tell me that you're young and idealistic and it's not really about making money. Well, that might be fine right now, but I need you to be thinking about the long haul. This is called having a psychotemporal perspective. You have to be just as idealistic 20 years from now. When one is 20 and writes poetry, one is 20. When one is 40 and still writing poetry, one is a poet.
Middles. The next two stories are about the middle phase of social work. The first is a short reflection on the benefits of doing social work. And the second, called The Principle of Opposites, takes the universal and often daunting experience of crisis work and breaks it down into simple language that everyone can understand. So, Ogden, what are some of the benefits of social work?
The benefits? If you do your social work right, few people will know about it. To be a social worker is always about giving it away, making others feel and be empowered. Yes, it will be you who enters into the life of the Little Women's Chowder Society some Wednesday night. It will be you who asks the group what they think the problem is. It will be you who will explore with them solutions. It will be you who asks Mavis to speak up, and you who asks Mabel to wait a bit. But it will be they who make the decisions, invent the objectives, and accomplish the tasks that will make them feel like the greatest thing since sliced bread. When you drive home that night, you may roll down the window of your car and howl at the moon. It will be a lonely wolf howl celebrating success. No one will understand how you have influenced things, how you have done some good in the world. When you do it right, social work is a feeling that is larger than your own life. Psychologists call this feeling flow state. You've probably experienced it, perhaps when you were raising your voice in song with a chorus, or making that consciously unconscious excellent pass on a basketball court, or a golf swing, or preparing a perfect meal. It happens when you know what you know and you do it. In the middle, with other people, without needing to know it, yet you know it. Perhaps the next day you might run into someone else in the club, another social work colleague, and casually note that you did what you did the previous evening and how you were, quote, in the zone. If they are wise and experienced, they will nod and smile and validate your efforts. It's so cool when that happens, they might say. It's social work. I've read thousands of pages of books and articles on being helpful to persons in crisis and disaster. Here's what I've got from all that reading. Intervening in crisis requires one to stay calm and be focused on basic needs. If cold, add warm. If wet, add dry. If hard, add soft. If dark, add light. If hungry, add food. If thirsty, add water. If homeless, add shelter. If naked, add clothes. If lost, add orientation. If hopeless, add hope. If crowded, add space. If isolated, add people. It's really not rocket science, but you'd be surprised how well it works. Walk into the middle of a crisis, stay calm, and apply the principle of opposites, and people will think you're a genius.
Endings. The last two stories are about endings. The first, Killing Brendan, I go, ego, we go, is Ogden's very personal reflection about his newborn son. And the final story, Decathexis, is about saying goodbye. So much of social work is figuring out ways to connect with clients, to engage with them, to draw them out and support them to go places that they'd rather not go, both physical and metaphysical. There are moments, however, when the best thing we can do for our clients is to honor their need to be alone and let them go.
He was such a small thing, but he was so loud. He could cry for what seemed like such a long time. He was my firstborn, and in those first weeks after his birth, we soon grew exhausted from the massive demands he made upon us. Feeding, wiping, diapering, holding, consoling, singing, feeding, wiping, diapering, holding, consoling, singing, feeding. We started sleeping in shifts, as it made no sense that we both should be awake. It was my turn one Sunday afternoon. I had fed, wiped, and diapered, and yet he was still crying. That usually meant it was time for some holding and walking. In motion in his little papoose on my chest, I would walk a path, a circle in the living room. The rhythm of my steps and the rocking usually lulled him to sleep after some feeding, wiping, and diapering. Upon awakening, he was usually good for some moments of alert but quiet rocking walking, followed by some crying, which meant more feeding, wiping, diapering. But today he just seemed inconsolable. No matter what I did, he would not drift off to sleep. I went through my array, praying he would not wake his napping mother upstairs. I paced my circle, watching the Buffalo Bills play football. Walking, walking, walking. I was tired too, but it was my watch. I tried to feed, he cried. I tried to wipe, he cried. I tried to diaper, he cried. I paced and rocked and paced some more. And all he did was keep crying. A jagged little wail, a persistent little goat cry with that red beet face. I tried to distract myself by glancing at the TV, but I had long ago lost track of the score. It was just a shining green point of reference, my mind numb. He cried some more, and I rocked, to no consolation. I paced in hopelessness, and then it dawned on me how powerless and small he was. It dawned on me how easily I could make him stop. I had never been to that dark place of horror before. I had never been to that place of such frustration that I could consider smothering the life from another. In an instant, I was rocked in my very being at the awareness of the utter violence that I now knew was contained within me. I shuddered as I knew I could be a monster. I quaked as I realized how I could become the instrument of my own son's death. I was filled with shame and horror. I choked with a cloud of guilt and sorrow and self-rage. I was torn in a way that I had never been torn. As I sank into this blood-red blackness, I was instantly pulled into the consciousness that I also had the power not to act. I was Superman against my own darkness. I was the defender against the enemy within. It was a bright and liberating light. I was buoyed in that bleak moment into a place of strength and love. It was a remarkable moment to transform so quickly, to understand the depths of loathing and self-accomplishment in so short a time. I became this thing that was so much deeper and wider than I was before. I knew I was now a father. In that moment, when I knew I could kill Brendan, and I knew I would not, I became reborn. He cried, and I paced, and I rocked, and I held him close. We had made each other precious. They loved her so very much, and she loved them. Some had come from thousands of miles away. Throughout the weekend, they had kept a vigil, reading to her from a family Bible, holding her tiny hand, stroking her hair. She would slip in and out of consciousness, but upon awakening, always slowly look about and smile. Her breathing was shallow and labored. They offered her fluids, but she would often just silently refuse. She beckoned me closer. Need to be alone, she whispered. I understand, Anna. Goodbye, I whispered into her ear. I asked the family if they would follow me into the hallway, closing her door. I explained to them that the patient loved them all very much, but she needed a moment to herself. I asked if they would like to take a moment down the hall in the chapel, and they agreed. She only needed 5 minutes and was gone.
You've been listening to excerpts of Ogden Rogers' collection of short stories, Beginning, Middles, and Ends, published by White Hat Communications. Thanks to Ogden for writing and reading his stories, and for Linda Grobman of White Hat Communications for giving us permission to produce and air these stories today. Special thanks to the musicians who gave us permission to use their music. Guitarists Brett Parnell and Jeremy Schulich of the group 350. You heard clips from tunes Home Somewhere and 29 from their album Collapses. Thanks to French pianist Laurent Assoulin, whose haunting piece Musc from the album of the same name we heard on the final story D Cathexis and is playing underneath me right now. And thanks to Michael McHern, One-Way Heartbeats from the album New For Me that started out our stories. There are links to each of these pieces of music in Ogden's book on the Social Work Podcast website. If you liked what you heard today, let the artists know with your wallet. Buying music and books no longer requires you to take a trip to your local record store or bookstore, although I really encourage you to do both if they exist in your town. These days, we just need to click a couple of links, spend a couple of bucks, and wait a couple of minutes. And years of somebody's hard work is ours to enjoy forever. I'm Jonathan Singer, and you've been listening to another episode of the Social Work Podcast. For a transcript of this episode, links and resources, or to find other episodes, please visit the website at socialworkpodcast.com. If you want to connect with the global community of podcast listeners, please join us on Twitter or Facebook. Thanks for all your hard work. We'll see you next time at the Social Work Podcast.